Italy also had a colonial empire, but did the Italian colonial empire came any close to the Roman Empire that had existed for centuries and was by that time the largest empire in the world? Let's find out. Hey, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, I'm Stefan, history teacher, hustling history for you, and the only thing you have to do is make sure to subscribe. Also hit the notification bell to join the hustle. Let's start. Up until the 19th century, Italy was a state of the Church. These so-called Papal States had existed for centuries from early Middle Ages onwards and were the center of Roman Catholicism. But this all changed in the 19th century. Because of several revolutions and wars, Italy was able to unite. Now, this process was named Risorgimento, also known as Resurgence, and was completed in 1871. Now, the leaders of the Resurgence soon concluded that Italy, although united, was very divided. And because of an economic crisis, over 1 million Italians left the country. Italy had an imperial center, but it lacked an empire itself, and thus colonial aspirations were born. In 1887, Francesco Crispi became prime minister, and he made Italian colonial aspirations more clear. This guy was a fervent nationalist, and he wanted to expand Italy. Demographic and economic arguments were supplemented by historical and messianic rhetoric. Italy was in need of colonies. The past demanded it, and the future made it necessary. Italians' geographical position made it quite logical that they would interfere on what happened on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. However, the first Italian colony was not established at the Mediterranean Sea, no, at the Red Sea. In 1869, the Italians purchased the Assab Bay, this with the idea that the Suez Canal would soon open and they could make use of a position located there. This area was first run by an Italian chartered company, but in 1882 it became the official first Italian colony. In 1885, the Italians took Massawa. Now, their idea was to connect these two colonies by conquering the hinterland, and this happened in 1890, and thus Italian Eritrea was established. Right next to this colony were British and French Somaliland. Now, 1 year later, the British and the Italians signed a treaty in which the Italians could have their influences over the Horn of Africa. The Juba River had to be the border between the Italian territories and British East Africa. The Italians now pointed their arrows at Ethiopia. Now, the Ethiopian Empire had existed from the 13th century onwards and was also known as Abyssinia. It was an empire in decline. I read that at the beginning of the 19th century, when the Ethiopian Empire passed away, that he was so poor they couldn't even afford him a coffin. Being a weak and unstable empire in decline in the 19th century is a recipe for disaster. There were the Egyptians that wanted to expand, not to mention the British and the Italians. Now, the Italians, they moved in 1887. But believe it or not, when the Italians moved in 1887, they were taken by a surprise attack of the Ethiopians that were at that moment numerically superior. And thus, the Italians were slaughtered. The attack left 400 dead, and this humiliating defeat had to be avenged. Yet the Italians also used the weapon of diplomacy by stirring up internal rivalry within the Ethiopian imperial court. Now, long story short, after the death of Ethiopian Emperor Johannes, there was a power struggle, and the Emperor Menelik ascended to the throne. Now, he modernized the Ethiopian army. Also, he was a gifted diplomat, and he received many foreign ambassadors at his imperial palace. Because Ethiopia was located strategically in the area of the Blue Nile River, Menelik received British favors, French favors, Russian favors, and Italian favors. Now, in 1889, the Italians and the Ethiopians signed the Treaty of Wuchale. Now the thing was this, in the treaty it said that the Emperor of Menelik was allowed to make use of Italian services. However, this is what it was written in local language. In Italian language was written that Emperor Menelik was obligated to make use of Italian services, thus rendering Ethiopia into a protectorate, which is basically one step away from a full colony. Other historians might argue that these things are one and the same. Anyhow, Menelik made clear he would not live up to these terms. When the Italian Prime Minister ordered Italian troops to move in, Menelik declared war upon them. This was known as the First Italo-Ethiopian War, when, on the 1st of March 1896, the Italian troops made an offense at Adwa. They suffered 6,000 dead, 15,000 wounded, and 18,000 captures. Basically, half of the Italian force was gone. And 5 days later, the Italians sued for peace. Yep, you heard it correctly. An African nation defeated a European nation on the battlefield. Were the Italians that bad, or were the Ethiopians that good? Well, I encourage you to look that up for yourself, and feel free to leave a comment down below. The Italians, they were not done with the Ethiopians, and I'll get back to that later in this video, so keep watching. In 1901, a concession in Tientsin was ceded to the Italians by Imperial China. Basically, what it came down to was that the Italians now had their own quarter in the Chinese city of Tianjin, just like many other European nations at the time, and these were basically improved embassies, so to say. Okay, let's return to the African continent and take a look at what happened in Libya. Now, in 1881, the French took Tunisia, and this place the Italians preferred to have taken because the ancient city of Carthage that was taken by the Romans after a fierce battle in 146 BC was located there. Moving further to the east, where Egypt is located, that was now under British influence. So what was left were two Ottoman provinces, Tripoli and Cyrenaica, where Turkish rule had practically crumbled. In 1911, the Italians moved in during the Italo-Turkish War. There, they dropped bombs from a plane, and this was known as the first aerial bombing in history. The Italians also took some Turkish islands in the Aegean. Now the British, they stepped in and urged the Italians to stop further aggression, and this perhaps saved the Ottoman Empire from total annihilation. The Italians now controlled Libya, although you couldn't really say controlled because the local Arab population did not receive the Italians as liberators from the Ottomans, and soon rebellions emerged. The Italians had to send in 100,000 soldiers to restore order, and the plan that Italians would migrate to the newly acquired North African territory, that didn't happen. So how did the colonies develop under fascist rule, you might ask? Okay, Benito Mussolini gained power in Italy in 1922 after his infamous march on Rome. Now, although the Kingdom of Italy officially stayed intact with King Emmanuel III on the throne, the de facto ruler was now Mussolini. Mussolini dreamed of a rebirth of the Roman Empire, and also he wanted to avenge the defeat that the Italians suffered in Ethiopia. But first, he had to pacify Libya. In Libya, Arab insurgents kept harassing the Italians. They were led by rebel leader Omar Mukhtar. Mussolini launched a horrific pacification campaign that can be described as pure ethnic cleansing, with forced deportations and mass executions. It cost the lives of over 80,000 Cyrenaicans. When, in 1931, rebel leader Omar Mukhtar was captured and executed, the rebellion was effectively ended. If you want to see a motion picture that depicts these events, check out the 1981 motion picture The Lion of the Desert, starring Oliver Reed and Anthony Quinn. Did you know that when the movie was released, it got banned in Italy? It's definitely worth a watch. Go check it out. Although the relations between Italy and Ethiopia were now pretty good and Italy had a seat in the League of Nations, Mussolini, he wanted to take over Ethiopia. Ethiopia was one of the very, very few African nations that was not subjugated to European colonization. Now, the direct cause for a second Italian invasion was a border clash between the Ethiopians and troops from Italy and Somaliland. Now, this matter could have been easily solved in the League of Nations, yet Mussolini, he chose to let the situation escalate, and what followed was the Second Italian-Ethiopian War of 1935. Italian and Eritrean troops were joined by Ethiopians that rebelled against their emperor Haile Selassie. It became a brutal war. Atrocities were committed on both sides. Ethiopian troops mutilated Italian POWs, and the Italians made use of poison gas. After 7 bloody months, the Italians managed to take over Ethiopia. The Emperor Haile Selassie, he fled to England. Now note here that although the Italians proclaimed victory, they suffered some heavy losses. Now what we see here is that after Italy took over Ethiopia, the League of Nations was not able to make a powerful stand against Italian aggression. Hitler saw this too, and he went further in his measures that eventually would culminate into the Second World War. And because of all this, Italy and Germany were brought closer together and would eventually become allies in the future war. In 1936, Italy had these ambitions for its expansion. Let's see how this all played out. In April 1939, the Italians invaded Albania and established a fascist protectorate. In May 1940, Nazi Germany launched Operation Wallenrot to invade and conquer France. Now, the Italians, they also joined in, but it went very bad. I mean, the Italian troops, they didn't even pass through most of the French outposts. Nevertheless, the Axis powers proclaimed victory, and Italy was rewarded with a territory in the French Alps, some border areas, and Corsica. In October 1940, the Greco-Italian War started. From its protectorate in Albania, the Italians launched an invasion into Greece. Now this also did not went according to plan. Soon the Italian advance was halted, and the Greeks, they launched a counter-offensive, driving the Italians out of Greece, and eventually the Greeks even captured a quarter of the Italian protectorate of Albania. An Italian counter-offensive that followed was not successful as well. The war ended with German intervention, and now most of Greece came under Italian control. In April 1941, Italy helped Nazi Germany with its invasion of Yugoslavia. As a result of this, the Italians gained control over several territories of the partitioned state, as you can see on this map. In the Second World War, Italy also extended, or wanted to extend, its influence over the African continent. After the fall of France in June 1940, the puppet state of Vichy France now ran the French colonies. Yet, the Italians got Tunisia. August 1940, the Italians took over British Somaliland. September 1940, the Italians invaded British Egypt with initial success, only to be driven back into Libya. With German support, the North African campaign started that eventually resulted in an Allied victory in May 1943. In East Africa, the Italians were practically defeated at the end of 1941. Only Italian guerrilla activities continued till 1943. In September that year, Italy surrendered, and Germany took over its territories in Europe. And with this, the Italian colonial empire effectively came to an end. In 1946, after the Second World War had ended, a referendum was held in Italy that transformed the country from a kingdom into a republic. In 1947, the Treaty of Peace with Italy was signed, where Italy was stripped of its colonies. Libya came under British and French control and became an independent kingdom in 1951. Ethiopia had gained its independence back. Eritrea joined Ethiopia in 1950. The Italians did administrate Somalia, this time under the flag of the League of Nations. And in 1960, this territory merged with British Somaliland and became Somalia. It is too bad that travel agencies these days advise against traveling to most of the former Italian colonies in Africa. I would love to see the remains of Italian colonialism. Have you ever been to a former Italian colony? I would love to know, so feel free to leave a comment down below. If you like this content, please consider becoming a patron, because with your donations I can keep doing this and expand. If you want to know more about the German colonial empire, you can click right here. Do not forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Ciao.